Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of The Deep Cut with John Rocha here today. I am very excited. Like, all my creative juices and political juices are coming together and blue-collar juices are coming together for this particular documentary that is going to, we're recording this, it will be released from when this is being released. It's probably released today already on Netflix and also in limited release. It's called American Factory, and the two directors have taken the time to sit down with me today, and I want to introduce you to them, Julia Reichert and Steve Bognar.
Hey, hi.
Right?
Hi,
Glad
John.
to be here. Good.
Yes,
yeah.
Is that right, Bognar?
Blue collar. I didn't know you were blue collar.
Oh, yeah. Don't let the gel in the hair fool you.
Yeah.
I'm from a hard work. I'm first-generation American. My parents are immigrants, and I've been taught that since day one. Since 15 years old, I've been working to earn a wage and live my life and
Me
do whatever.
too.
Yeah.
Me too. And he's first-generation American.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm working class background.
Right.
Union man was my dad.
Oh, exactly. So, okay.
Republican union man, but there are lots of those.
Yes, of course there are. And this is I should let you all know who are listening who might not know. Julia and Steve, they're Oscar-nominated documentary filmmakers whose work has screened at Sundance, Telluride, South by Southwest, as well as HBO and PBS. Their film A Lion in the House was a co-production with ITVS, which premiered at Sundance and is on the PBS series Independent Lens. I have the PBS app. I always go back in Independent Lens and watch stuff. It's always fun to explore. So many documentaries in the world, so much going on. Finding a new way in is very interesting. They won a Primetime Emmy in their film The Last Truck. Closing of a GM Plant premiered at the 2009 Telluride Film Festival, screened on HBO, and was also nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary Short in 2010. So these are people with a lot of pedigree in the studio.
We have a car and we have a camera and we know how to drive, and so we know how to start a film.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
That's about what it takes.
Yeah.
Well, let's start this. Okay, so American Factory, let me give the people just a quick synopsis and we'll jump into the questions I have for you. It's a GM plant that closed in Dayton, Ohio, and then was reopened by this Chinese company, Fuyao, so they could make glass for cars.
Exactly.
And you all were – now, how did you all get access to this? How does this project come about? Because – it's incredible the access you get to both sides of this coin in this film as a Chinese company coming in, hiring American workers, bringing over Chinese workers, and having them work together to cultures clashing to try to create glass for cars.
Well, clash or collide or negotiate, we were always trying to figure out what was really going on. Well, we live there.
Right.
We live in
You're
Dayton,
both from
Ohio, so that makes it easy. As Steve said, we have cameras, we have sound recording equipment, and we can hop in the car and go pretty much anywhere in the area.
Well, we had made this earlier film that you mentioned, John, The Last Truck. Mm-hmm. That was about the closing of the GM plant in 2008, and we filmed that for 6 months, very intensive filming period, and we edited that quickly and got it out, and it was on HBO. That film is really well known in Dayton because it was a Dayton story.
Right.
And 6 years later, when that plant had been sitting empty and rusting and hollowed out for all those years, when the Chinese billionaire Cho Tak-wang bought the old GM plant and said, we're going to bring jobs back to Dayton, we're going to bring manufacturing back to Dayton, it was big news. And we didn't ever think we'd go back into that factory after we left it. I mean, it was, just everyone was like, this is so sad. It stood there empty like a monolith, and a haunted monolith. But the chairman had a sense of this has a lot of symbolic value for the town. He could have built a new factory out in some field.
Right.
But he said, I see this huge building. Let's give it a new life. As that started to happen, the folks from Dayton who helped get the company here were, kind of talked to the chairman about bring your company to Dayton. Somehow the conversation said, we got to document this. It's going to be big. And then our names came up because we had made that earlier film.
Right.
And so we started talking to the company. And at first the company was going to sponsor it, but we don't do that.
About the company, you mean Fuyao?
Fuyao.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Fuyao was going to sponsor the film. That was the sort of the idea in the air.
Right.
But, pretty quickly we said, look, we don't do that. But if you give us access, real access, but let us make an independent film that we own, that we control, that we have editorial control over, and we take zero money from the company, from anyone, then we'll do it.
Yeah.
And the chairman, who is very much a maverick and decides things on his own, said, yeah, let's do it. Let's give it a shot.
And you know, we all know that the rivalry between China and the United States is one of the big stories of the 21st century.
Yes.
It really is. And here it was, right in our hometown, 20 minutes from our house.
Right.
We were going to see what that was going to look like up close. We were going to see what it was look like when China and America kind of come together in this factory. We were going to see what happened for the Chinese, far, far, far from home, missing their kids, facing a whole new life. Like, these guys have never had to, like, cut their grass. You know, they've never had 4-bedroom houses. Some of the higher-up people, their kids had to go to school. Their kids didn't have a word of English.
Right.
So, and also what was going to happen for our, like, beaten-down blue-collar town to have all these Chinese managers and so forth and engineers coming into our town. That was going to, you know, there were hundreds of them.
Yeah.
So we knew there was going to – something interesting was going to happen.
Yeah.
We didn't know what it was going to be.
Yeah, complications ensue.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And this is 2015?
Right. We started filming early 2015.
Right.
After we got the green light, and we would end up filming. We go into a place. We don't know how long we will film. With our earlier film, A Lion in the House, which is about kids fighting cancer, we thought we'd film for 6 months, and we filmed for like 5 years.
Wow.
So in this story, we went in knowing, like, we'll see where it goes. We're trying to leave our preconceptions at the door. You know, the great D.A. Pennebaker just died, the great documentarian, and he was a great inspiration for us. He always said, just enter an environment, open your heart, open your eyes, open your ears, and the story will come to you.
He said immerse, just immerse. Just
Yeah.
immerse yourself. And that's what
And we try
What
to
we've
do
tried
that.
to do, yeah.
You know, don't go in there with a story in mind, because if you have that, you'll miss many other threads.
That's the question I have. And Pennebaker, of course, shout out to his Bob Dylan documentary, which is incredible. I recently bought that on Criterion. You look at this, how do you select which Americans and which Chinese workers to follow? Because what you all did with this, with the camera and the access you had, so many perspectives are presented, so many points of views are laid out here, and it's easy to fall into the trap of villainize, 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 but you have to understand the approach people have from birth, from generations within their country of how to do things. So how did you end up finding out which of the gentlemen and ladies to follow in this film?
You know, we followed a lot of people, a lot more than
imagine.
you see in the film, because we didn't know at first what the story was going to be. You don't really know who's going to have their own story that's going to happen. You don't really know who's going to be sort of open to the camera. So we followed a lot of people. And then in the editing process is actually where we sort of pared it down to people who followed – whose story intersected with the basic spine of the story, which was answering, I would say, what we told our crew and what we told ourselves is the question of this film is going to be, will this endeavor succeed? Will it succeed? And then we had to think about, well, what does success mean? And success for the blue-collar workers means something different than, say, the engineers, the management, the HR, and the owner. They all have different stakes. So we knew we had to have it's like upstairs, downstairs, right? You know, we have the blue-collar workers, we have the management folks, we have the chairman, Chairman Zhao, who's the owner. And we followed all of them. How did we decide? I think it was really in the editing room that we finally decided.
Yeah. Oh, they were characters, but you know, we filmed for 3 years. We shot over 1,200 hours of material. Wow. It's like a lot, more than double what we've ever shot before. There were characters we were absolutely sure would have like a through line, a whole narrative arc that was built into the movie. And they don't, because their personal arc, even though we love them and they're wonderful people, they didn't fuel the larger question that Julia just asked. And so they're in the film. You see them. They're they say one or two things, but their whole backstory does not get developed.
Yeah, Bobby is one you guys followed. Really enjoyed because his emotion about walking back into that plane. Because one of the things that when you talk about that 2009 documentary you all did, it's that final scene where everyone is hugging and crying and letting go of this, and then you have someone like Bobby walking back into that plant, all the emotions that come with it. And it's a documentary. This is just the beginning of his story and what's going to happen and all he goes through to the end where he's just like disillusioned about everything that's happened here, but also understands this is kind of the situation and he has to find a way to deal with it,
And we love Bobby because he's so philosophical, he's so thoughtful. And that's the kind of quote-unquote character that we look for in a film, someone who's really reflective. The factory's hugely loud, right? It's cacophonous, it's hot, it's intense. And one thing we started doing early on was getting like the little Zoom audio recorders, those portable.
Yeah, I have those. That's what I use for my own podcasts.
Yeah,
exactly.
the H4n.
They're
or
wonderful.
H4n, yeah.
They're wonderful,
and we would ask people, we'd get in a little huddle and sit down at their house or even a couple times at libraries and just quietly talk about how the work was going, how their lives were going.
Yeah.
And that gave us intimate sounding audio that we laid over them while they're doing those repetitive jobs. Have you ever had a job where you kind of zone out?
Of course.
It's so repetitive. So we thought, well, let's
trust me. Yeah.
So let's create some kind of interior monologues to sort of replicate that experience of like drifting and kind of dreaming about your life while you're doing some kind of intensively repetitive job.
Yeah, and I want to get go ahead, Julia.
Well, I was going to say another thing cool about that. We started doing these little audio recordings, which are way less intimidating to people to agree to do than, okay, we're going to come to your house, we're going to check out the lighting, we're going to shoot, we're going to film you.
Right.
These are much easier, and that gave us kind of the step one of their life. Like, okay, right now, it's month 3 of your work there. What's it like? How are you feeling? Are you liking it or not? How are the Chinese treating you? Are you pro-union or anti-union? Whatever the questions might be. And then 6 months later, 8 months later, you check in with them again and then again. And it's much easier to do if you just do it on audio.
Right.
So we're huge fans of audio.
They feel less intimidated by the situation. I find that too.
And you can get more intimate.
Yes.
You can get more, and even like as we're sitting here now, if we had 3 cameras on us right now, we would not be talking like this.
Well, this is why I do the show as a podcast instead of being on camera, which we have 2 separate studios. I like the podcast. People feel more relaxed, more comfortable. It becomes a conversation.
Yeah.
And you speak about the union, non-union people. This becomes, in the latter half of the movie, a very big thing. You lay the groundwork slowly throughout the documentary, and then it leads to this situation. And you don't want to give away too much because you really want to watch the film and enjoy the film. But that just highlighted for me the differences in the work culture between America and China, and how difficult it is to find that common ground. They're so distinctly different.
It was so much more difficult than anyone expected.
Yeah.
In the early days, everyone was so excited. People are inviting each other over to their apartments or houses, cooking Chinese meals for the Americans, or Americans are going bowling with the Chinese. All this kind of bubbly, fizzy cultural interaction was happening.
Right.
And it was fun. But then once the plant wasn't making profit as quickly as everyone thought it would, as the Chinese team thought it would, then the pressure started. And that sort of ended the honeymoon phase. And as we kept filming, we started to see, wow, the Chinese are used to working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and that is, there's this sort of phrase in the air, 996, meaning 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. You're not going to get American workers to do that. Right. It's not that they're lazy or any way, but it's like these jobs are hard and demanding, and back then the wage was $12 an hour.
Right.
That's like $26,000 a year. It's not enough to like raise a family on. So you're not going to then stay extra hours or want to stay extra hours to keep working this intensely challenging job.
Yeah.
But for the Chinese, that's the expectation. That's sort of the normal. And so they do it. I don't know that they like it, but they do it.
Well, I think that's what's great about the film is that you highlight certain Chinese who are part of this Fuyao, who are all about it, and then other Chinese workers who don't like it. Like that one gentleman who he lights a cigarette. It's like, this is my favorite part of the day, getting to unwind, because I just have to constantly do this, and I miss my home, and because they're brought over. And that was great too, to see these vulnerable moments with the Chinese workers and the American workers that you, as a human being, you can connect to and understand. Right, being transplanted into a place.
Well, that's something we hope. So the very end of the film, you see streams of workers coming out of the Fuyao plant, both in China and the U.S. And one thing we're trying to say there is exactly what you're pointing out, is that for the blue-collar workers, whether they're Chinese or American, they have similar stakes. They have similar issues in their life. Their work is very hard. They don't – a lot of – they're restricted from seeing their families. They don't have a lot of say in their daily life. Certainly workers in China don't have a lot of say.
Right.
And unless you have a union, you don't have a lot of say over your work life in the United States either. So if people could just see their common interests, that would be really a good thing. And you see in the film also, though, that while you see blue-collar workers trying to have fun together, the fishing scene.
Yes.
We had lots of scenes like that we could have used, but enjoying Thanksgiving together, including shooting off guns together. But the management, the upper management on the China side, tended to berate and belittle the American workers.
Right.
Which, saying we're better than them.
Yes.
Even literally saying that. And using nationalism, like we're the motherland. We're doing this for not just the company, but for our country, to build our country. And that's very Chinese. I mean, that's very much how it is. But that kind of nationalism tends to keep working people apart. Like your loyalty is to your country. And we see that here, too, of course. We're the greatest country in the world.
Well, that's what I found fascinating about the film, too, is you're highlighting the tribalism, which is a term now that everyone is using in the political landscape, this idea of tribalism, right?
Interesting.
But it's happening in your documentary as well. In two specific sequences, certainly when they're initially telling you how the American is overconfident and the American is this or that, like these incredibly skewed points of view, generalities about Americans, when Americans have the largest mental health stuff, they're the most unconfident people, and yet they want to present the American a certain way. Like he's blunt or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I found that they sow division on purpose in order to push them back up and lift them as better than.
Well, when you're trying to motivate the troops.
That's what I'm saying.
Like when you're trying to motivate your team, you need an opposing team.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's,
even if you're working together with that.
Yeah,
team,
well, that's the sad irony of it all is that they were appealing directly but exclusively to the Chinese team as opposed to the entire intercultural team, right?
Yeah.
And we were always wondering, like, what if they had big meetings where they're really trying to rally everyone, and it was bilingual and there's translation, but we didn't really see that, and that was tough. As we filmed, we realized like we're missing so much of the story because we don't speak Chinese. We're not Chinese.
Right.
And we realized we needed to get Chinese filmmakers on our team. And that's when we started bringing into Ohio from New York. We found, through some friends and contacts, we found some younger Chinese documentary filmmakers.
Oh, that's great.
Some of them were going to the School of Visual Arts. But we eventually found two young filmmakers who became our actual co-producers. They came so much that they sort of elevated on the film team.
That's incredible.
One is Yichen Zhang and the other is Mijie Li. They're both really talented young filmmakers, and they started coming to Ohio every month. One was there or both were there. And then we were also in China with them for the entire filming of in China.
Right.
And that was crucial. So when we have relationships with Wang or Leon, some of the Chinese guys, or even the chairman, it's because Yichen and Mijie were building those relationships.
Did you find that all of a sudden that opened the door for more of the Chinese workers to be more open and more vulnerable in their conversation with you all?
100%. Absolutely 100%.
Right.
We don't speak the language, so we're going through a translator. There's a lot of lack of understanding, maybe even suspicion about the two, So we found that as soon as we had Chinese people behind the camera talking with them, people immediately start opening up. People immediately start saying, come on over to my house for dinner, meet the kids, talking late into the night. It made a vast difference. And it took us a little while to kind of realize that. The other thing that, sometimes people ask you, well, what was the biggest challenge of making your film? Was it security? Was it this or that? Actually, I think the biggest challenge in many ways was for us to understand Chinese culture.
Right.
Was for us as, middle middle Americans.
Right.
And those two Chinese producers, us talking long into the night, finding out about their backgrounds, their work life, their education, the history of China, how they see the president, how they see the Communist Party, how did the Cultural Revolution affect them? Just coming to understand China was a huge endeavor for us.
And it really helped us to not look at it through an Ohio lens, through a Midwestern lens. It's easy for Midwesterners who have lost so many jobs and so much sort of security to sort of view China's rise as something anxious. And we wanted to make a film that doesn't take that point of view. It's just, people in the film have that point of view, but the film itself tries not to in a big way.
Well, I think that's what's essential about this film. It shows you the sides, and you can decide how you want to feel about it. You can choose one side or another, or you can choose to understand both sides and just realize that this is just an example of what might be happening more and more, or is currently happening more and more in this country as China becomes it makes more inroads, and an administration like the Trump administration becomes more conducive to allow business to do their practices as they see fit. I think that was so interesting to watch as well, how some of the stuff that you see the Chinese people wanting the Americans to do, you're starting to hear bubbling up. Other businesses in this country are wanting to have their own American workers kind of adhere to that as well and destroy unions.
Yeah, there's been a huge multi-decade effort to reduce, the power that working people have collectively, by undermining unions. And when we were filming, as the union campaign started going, the company brings in this sort of union avoidance company. Yeah,
Labor Relations Institute or whatever.
Right.
Yeah,
They're
it's
consultants.
one of the big ones, yeah.
And we found out there's all kinds of companies like that out there who help businesses, corporations avoid unions. Yeah. And it's done through very sophisticated, intensive messaging, and closed-door mandatory meetings with the staff. And it becomes like a major campaign. As a union vote is approaching, workers can go to meetings twice, even 3 times, get this sort of, pretty intensive kind of lecture or talk. And it was very potent. And we don't want to reveal what happens in this movie. But it was revelatory to us to see that.
Well, you just made an observation about the nature of the film and what we and I'm glad you said it that way, because that's what we were trying to say, is not like we're going to give you an answer or tell you this is what you need to fight for right now. You might derive that out of the film, but we felt like we had this microcosmic, intimate, up-close personal look at tectonic plates of our culture and our economy shifting globally, right? We had that chance to be in there while it was happening. And we got amazing access.
Yes.
We've got amazing access. And then we gained trust of a lot of people, so they would really open up to us. And when you get that, you don't, as a filmmaker, you don't want to make a muckraking piece. Maybe we could have. Maybe we could have.
Oh, there's an easy way to skew this thing in one way or another.
Especially in the current environment, which wasn't really quite so bad when we were shooting the film. But we really wanted to present to you, look, guys, this is what is going on in our country. And this is what is going on in our world, especially in the center of it, especially for like the average working person. Steve was alluding to workers' rights. Workers' rights and workers' work life are being pushed down. We all know that wages are very stagnant. We all know there's a billionaire class that grows and grows every month or whatever. And those are the big things. But what you see on a small level is just these folks who are so desperate for jobs that they're happy to have these $12 an hour jobs. It's the best. Somebody says it's the best thing going.
What, right.
But that's our country right now.
Right.
Are we becoming a low-wage country?
That's
what's going on?
And I think that's what's so great about your documentary is, like, while we're watching them trying to find common ground with each other, you as a viewer are, like, at first going, God, that's a terrible situation, what's going on with China and the way they treat their workers. And then you start to go, like, wait a minute, that's actually happening here.
Yeah, right.
And you're like, oh my God, are we as a country, business-wise, becoming that? Because I find the great fallacy in the Chinese approach is that they tell their workers, you should be happy to have this job, do extra work, do whatever, show what you can do, and don't worry about money. It's about showing your worth. But the whole company's point is to make as much money as possible. So I find that to be such a dichotomy in philosophies, a convenient dichotomy, so to speak.
We as filmmakers, we're always striving for nuance. We're always looking for the thing that upends the expectation or the easy reflexive stereotype or whatever. Like take the chairman, for example. He is a driven capitalist communist businessman, right? I mean, he's not in the Communist Party, but he's from a communist country. He's a brilliant capitalist. And yet he's also like a practicing Buddhist. Yeah. And when he says, like, I want the cultural connections between America and China to be strengthened, I want Americans to see China in a new way, he means that. But he also believes in profit, and that is very much a bottom line for him. He's got complexity to him, and we tried in filming him, and we interviewed him like 8 times. We really tried to find that complexity and that nuance. And it's true for everyone in the film, whether they're blue-collar American management, blue-collar Chinese management.
Yeah, I thought that too. And I really love what you did with the chairman because initially when you're watching the film, you feel one way about him. But near the end, there is this opening up that you're just like, oh, wait a minute. There's more to this person. And inadvertently, you kind of allow us to find connection with this man who we normally probably would not have found connection with on the surface level.
Well, how many Chinese billionaires are you friends with, John?
How many billionaires do I know, period? But yes, Chinese billionaires certainly.
A friend of ours is an economist, and I remember at the end of the film she saw a rough cut. This is Paulette. And she had tears in her eyes at the end. And she said, everyone is screwed by capitalism, even the big capitalist. Because of what he said. She felt so touched by what he says there at the end.
Yeah.
So she felt like there was a big indictment of capitalism. That's not necessarily what I thought you should come out with the movie. I mean, it's not a bad thing to come out with.
I think it's there.
Yeah, it is there. But anyway.
Well, we're asking, is it sustainable?
Right.
Like, so you've got more and more pressure on working people around the world. Productivity demands go up and up. Wages don't go up. Wages are not sustainable for a lot of people in a lot of places. Safety issues are skirted. Globalization is disrupting everything. Automation is looming. That's going to displace working people. Yeah. And we hope the film raises all these kinds of big picture questions and starts conversations that we're not quite having because everyone's just sort of go or looking at the politics of the day or whatever. But all these tectonic plates of the world are shifting, right? And we should address them.
We should recognize it, and again, you see it in a very intimate, human way in this plant in Dayton, Ohio, and in another plant in Fujian, China. You see how things are changing, and what you really see is the pressure that's there upon the people who make stuff, the workers.
Yeah, that's what it seems to be based in, is this idea of how much can we take from you, guilt you into, force you into, so that we hit our numbers, our arbitrary numbers, our quotas. And I've worked jobs like this way back when in my 20s. And it's, when I come from a small town in Virginia. So to me, finding those jobs, you do what you could and you find your way out. But like that experience, I've experienced 2 takeovers. And so I've seen that happen. I thought this was going to go a certain way, that they were purposefully setting the Americans up for failure so they could install their Chinese executives in charge of the Americans. But that actually isn't what happens here. And I think you have a tendency to be black and white about something, but your film really forces you to look at the gray areas involved with everybody.
Well,
and I hope people stop and think that many of the things you see in the film that we don't like would happen in an American factory as well, an American-owned factory as well. Skirting the safety issues, keeping down wages, keeping out those unions, would happen in an American factory as well. And just getting as much as you can. Actually, when talking just today, I was talking with one of the supervisors. He's now a manager, actually, Austin. And, how's it going, these days? We talk to people a lot.
Yeah.
And he's someone who started on the floor and then became a supervisor, then became a manager. Now he's a manager of a whole area. And one of the things he pointed to today was, those numbers, they keep pushing those numbers on us. He's very pro-company. He probably earns a good salary now. He's a good manager. But that is something that, still gets to him, that there's so much emphasis on just the numbers.
Right. When we were filming, we had 5 main camera people, Julia and I, and then our nephew, who's a producer on the film, Jeff Reichert, and also Eric Stoll and Aubrey Keith. And each of us had to be like a solo documentary crew walking through that cavernous, huge factory. Yeah. And it was on us to build connection, trust, relationships with different people in different parts of the factory. But it's not just that like Eric, Aubrey, or Jeff were camera people. They were documentarians. They had to have all the skills of instinct, of knowing, oh, you know what, I should follow that person, not this person, because that person's about to do something and this could be dramatic or whatever. They'd had to apply all their documentary instincts to the process. And as we worked with everyone to sort of find the story, feel what are the threads, we were always trying to find those human connections and that nuance, that complexity. And then in the editing of the movie, so then, of course, we have 1,200 hours of footage, and how do we build a movie that's 1 hour and 50 minutes out of that? We had a brilliant editor, Lindsay Utes, who had done Quest. Did you see the movie Quest?
Oh, yeah, of course.
So she edited that.
Wow.
Great verite documentary from last year. We saw that at the True False Film Festival, fell in love with it. A month later, we shook her hand at the Full Frame Festival, and she was on board. This was in 2017, and 2017, and she started cutting. But as we worked with Lindsay and also like Jeff as a producer and our other producer, Julie Parker-Manella, other people, we realized that the best film we could make is to build a house where you have lots of room for opposing voices, but each room is respectful to that voice.
Yeah.
That it's a sturdy structure, but room for conflicting perspectives.
Yeah.
Well, Steve is pointing to, we are talking a lot about the issues in the film and how it relates to today and the world and globalization and all that. But really, we had to make a cracking good film. It had to be, and it is. I think it's funny.
Yes.
I think it's very cinematic. And I think it has a definite, clear storyline that you're a little bit on the edge of your seat, I hope.
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt that way.
Absolutely.
Like, what's going to happen next?
Right. Who's going to be affected, especially following that lady who was living in her sister's basement and then found her, and then what happens to her, and then what ends up happening to her. You're like, you just feel that. And so, all of that. I was on the edge because it's a film that takes its time, and I love that as a documentary. It presents everything, moves through it all. It's not going to be exciting chases or anything like that. It's just what it is, right? And you've got to go. It's the humanity and what these people are experiencing that you can relate to as a worker. I'm not a billionaire, and nobody I'd work with is a billionaire. So it's like, what can you find in this movie to latch onto to carry you through the story? And certainly there are many people you selected on both sides. But also, that being said, you've also got some villains in this thing, a couple of villains in this thing on both sides, in my opinion. And this is where I get to a little bit of the harder question. Certainly, that gentleman who was asking for the senator to have his head cut off, I mean, that was
Dave,
wow.
Dave.
I found that to be a little villainous and reflective of the times of some business people thinking they're better than senators, and I find that to be fascinating.
Well, poor Dave. Dave is not a villain, and he's a good guy who really cared about that factory, gave his heart, quit his other job to come work for Fuyao, really cared, tried like heck.
And as you know, eventually loses that job.
Well, and he produced that huge event, that grand opening. He was like at the heart of making it happen. And so when Senator Brown says this thing that's a shocker on stage to hundreds of the community leaders, Dave was mad.
He certainly was
rightfully mad. And he said a few things that he probably shouldn't have said. And it's very funny, but but he's a good guy. He actually called the senator's office when he saw the film and said, he apologized to the senator.
Oh, good.
I think most audiences are laughing too hard to really think of him as sort of like a bad guy.
Okay.
It's more like he's a goofball. He said something he really shouldn't have said. It's
he's just having a moment.
Well,
very
and
funny.
The reality
scene.
is, we had been filming. Aubrey Keith, one of our camera people or cinematographers was filming Dave already for like 4 hours by the time that happened. And you just have a lavalier mic on. You have someone filming you, but you kind of forget it. And so she's like 3 feet away from him. Right. It's obvious she's filming him. But nevertheless, and this is after months and months of filming him, he's kind of like just living his life at that point and not being mindful of the camera.
Actually, there's a few instances. This is one of them where when people saw the film, they said, I totally didn't know you were there. And Dave actually in that scene said, you must have had a telephoto lens way away. And, of course, Aubrey is as close as I am to you or closer right now, filming him all day. That was her character for the day.
He probably had so much he was dealing with if he produced the event that he didn't even remember that she was around.
Yeah, and there's another scene where the Chinese leadership, they're all speaking in Mandarin Chinese, are talking about how's it going and the union, how are we with the union folks and all that, and that they had fired some. They all said later, we didn't know you were in the room. We didn't know you were filming. And there were 2 of us in there. Yeah. And there were mics all over the table, and we were both filming with cameras.
But
so
that happens in documentary.
It happens,
right?
Yeah.
It's not like someone is at fault or anything.
No.
We want people to forget us.
Right. You want to become part of the firmament where you have noticeable.
Exactly. If you're going to tell a story where people aren't performing for the camera, then you've got to put in the time. And we're very lucky that we live in Dayton, Ohio, and we live a 25-minute drive from that factory because over the course of the 3 years of filming, we drove there hundreds of times, hundreds and hundreds of times. And that's, I feel like, how you kind of get that authenticity that will make for a strong film.
Did you feel that did you get any of the workers or the representatives of FUYA? Did they come and want to like take a look at some of the footage or push back or threaten or want some stuff taken out? Did you have any experiences with that?
Well, there was one time. There was one time when we shot a scene, not either one of us, one of the others. And at the end of the scene, the folks came up from the company and said, we want that footage. Oh, wow. You have to give us that footage.
No, was that in China or was that
that
in
was here?
Yeah.
Okay. That was actually here.
But the people who wanted the footage were not filmed. It was like a conversation behind a closed door with 2 other people that was filmed.
Right.
But
anyway,
we didn't
we're like, no, we're not going to give it to you.
We had to remind them of the agreement that this is, we will strive to be fair. You trust us, but we will strive to be fair and represent you fairly, but also honestly. Yeah. And there's things in the film that are uncomfortable for anybody, and that's true if you're American or Chinese or management or not. We try not to have any cheap shots, but we strove to be fair. But also honest and unblinking at some of the things that happen. And, we hope we achieve that.
Yeah. But, since we have plenty of time here, something that I think is true is we had to continue to educate both really the Americans but certainly the Chinese about what we were doing and why, and remind them that, first of all, we definitely had permission to be there, that no, they couldn't say, like, we want you to film this for us. Because we're not like your crew.
Right.
And, there were
times... and the Americans didn't often believe us that we were truly independent. We made a mistake early on. We got rides on golf carts with management because the plant is so huge and we're carrying a heavy tripod and a heavy camera and camera bags. And so you're trundling through this 90-degree factory. Some management person comes up on a golf cart and says, you want to ride? And you're like, yeah. But then you realize everyone's looking at us, whizzing by them as they work, and they think we're with management. Right. So we had to walk, and there was little lessons like that we learned.
But what I'm trying to say is that we tried to educate people to that without struggle, without seeing the rough times, without following the hard parts of the story. We weren't going to have an interesting film.
Of course not.
Who wants to read a book or see a movie where everything's fine?
Yeah.
So, and there were realistically a lot of bumps in the road. And we had to keep educating people to no, this is going to humanize you all. This is not going to make you look bad in general, whether it's Americans or Chinese. They didn't, to really educate them as to how films and stories work, I guess.
Did you find suspicion on both sides?
Yeah, and especially as the union battle rose up, then management started thinking, oh, maybe these filmmakers are in cahoots with the union, and some of the workers who were pro-union wondered if we were company spies. So we had to be really careful. We were hearing information from all directions, and we started to realize we have to be really careful what we say because we don't want to alter the course of events by somehow saying something that would give one side or the other of this union battle information. Yeah. And that was tricky.
Well, I always think of it as like we're in the crow's nest on a ship. Actually, this was true when we made an earlier film called A Lion in the House that you referred to, which is a film about kids in Cincinnati, children fighting cancer and their families, childhood cancer. Right. And there were definitely times when we would be in the doctor meetings or the nurse meetings, and we'd hear the prognosis and hear stuff that was maybe pretty dire about the kids. And then we go to the parents, but we couldn't tell them. We'd go to the parents and try to have them tell us, what did you just understand of what the doctor said? And okay, let's capture that. And often it wasn't the same as we knew to be true. Right. So crow's nest, we can see, as in the Fuyao plant and Lion in the House, we could see all the players. But we could not. We feel as documentarians we can't impact the course of events.
So you follow that Star Trek Prime Directive, where you're not supposed to interfere in the course of events of the culture.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. I forgot that. Yeah.
So you must have seen some violations, but not been able to. Did you not get in not shoot
balls?
balls?
We saw things happen that if we were union activists, we would have reported to the union, but we didn't because that's not our role. And it was just a discipline we tried to really impose upon ourselves, and we had to.
I think that's one of the toughest things when I think about documentary filmmakers is how much you have to stop your own desire to affect what's happening so that you can capture the authenticity of what's really occurring. And if you start to get involved, then you've chosen a side. And by choosing a side, in essence, you've kind of ruined the documentary almost.
Well, again,
run the risk of it, at least.
I mean, one thing we learned from Penny, D.A. Pennebaker, is, when you're in a room and people are arguing or discussing something heatedly, you have to think, okay, where should my lens be? Who am I looking at? When do I look at the other person? When is the moment? You're both doing it on you're editing the film in your head because you're looking for a pause or a reaction shot, and you got to get those reaction shots. Or you're looking for, when is the tennis ball of this argument landing in the next, the one person's court, and you need to be on that person when they respond, when they're about to whatever, really get heated. And that – I mean, we love that process. It's super intense. It's very alive. It activates all our sort of brain cells and receptors. But it's also a responsibility because you're editorially choosing. You're making an editorial decision with your camera by who you look at. And if you're privileging one person, you're saying something about your feelings about who's the protagonist or who's right. Yeah. And we're trying not to do that as we film.
I want to talk about this one moment you have in the movie that's almost a moment from The Office, the TV show. That gentleman who's the American who speaks Chinese really well, and when they're in the visit to China, which we'll talk about just a little bit. I know we got to wrap up in a few minutes, but his conversation and then his look on his face when you guys go back to him after he's finished with the conversation, I don't know what to think about him because the stuff he says about American workers being an American, I felt like he was a traitor. But then when you see his face afterwards, it's almost like I have to say stuff like this and I hate myself that I have to say stuff like this. And I wonder if that – Kurt.
Same as Kurt.
I wonder if that was an interesting moment to capture for both. As you were watching this moment, as you're capturing this, what it must have been like.
Remember, as we're capturing it.
It's all in Mandarin Chinese.
All right, so you don't even know what he's saying.
I think you shot that, right,
shot
Steve?
that.
Steve just had an instinct that this is probably interesting. Two supervisors talking to each other. So we shot it. But it was a year later, we found out what was being said.
What was that moment like in the editing room?
That is a strange thing about this film. There are many meetings and where absurd or funny or shocking things are said, and we had no idea for a year. Some other meetings they were just talking about updating the software for the glass counting, blah blah blah, and it's boring. But then occasionally there's these really powerful, dynamic, absurd, funny, strange moments, like that moment with Kurt and his Chinese, colleague.
Right.
Yeah, that
Who's
was
essentially trying to calm him down. Or trying to show him a better way to approach things.
Well, actually, yeah, you're right.
Kurt is very dedicated to the company. He moved to Dayton, Ohio, for that job. Bought a house, really invested. He's one of the few Americans who's fluent in Mandarin Chinese,
right?
Even though he's like a good old Kentucky boy, and he was frustrated with his American workers, because they're not working at the level that the Chinese are, and so we got to give him his emotional authenticity that he's like, he's frustrated and he's saying stuff he probably shouldn't say, but it's not like he's the devil or anything. He's just mad. He's just like disappointed and mad.
Yeah, I love that scene when they're moving the fire alarm. The idea of moving the fire, like all of that. Those are the comical moments. You're just like, here's where translation is an issue.
It is, and also the chairman, the Chinese folks in general, did not know American laws,
which is fascinating.
They just didn't. I mean, he thought that was decoration,
right?
And he wanted it moved to another place. It doesn't look good there. And by the way, they're very, very interested in all the balance of colors and shapes and so forth. A lot of the Chinese leaders, we saw that again and again. They didn't know. They didn't really understand the EPA laws. They didn't understand OSHA laws. They didn't understand labor laws. And they skirted around them again and again. And they got lots of fines, too. They actually got big fines just 2 weeks ago. From OSHA, like $800,000 in $750,000 in fines. Yeah, right. So
it's an ongoing project. The company's now making a profit, and they still have 2,200 roughly American workers and about 200 Chinese workers. And depending on who you ask, people say like, "Oh yeah, it's definitely better, and I'm making more money." But some people are still frustrated and feel like it's the same pressures so it goes on.
Did you find that some of the American workers were kind of loafing on the job or weren't kind of fully committed to what they were doing? Or did you find – because it seems that none of that seems to be highlighted in the film.
No, they were fired.
Did you find –
people were fired if they didn't produce.
So that it isn't just because they were union supporters. Some people were fired legitimately for –
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Well, and people quit because it was too hard.
Right.
The turnover was huge.
Yeah, 3,000 or something like that?
Or actually at this point it's more like about 6,000 people have been through the plant.
Have come and gone as employees. It's remarkable for a young company.
Right.
Quite a few quit, just like literally walk off the job because they don't like it. It's too hard. Or some people are not really prepared for what factory work is. It's not for everybody. And if you're not pretty fit and really ready to focus and do the same thing again and again and really focus, you're not going to make it. But a lot of people get fired. Yeah, I think it's
because the company feels they're not productive enough, they're not focused enough, or what have you. If you pull out your cell phone, you might get fired because you're not supposed to do that. Stuff like that.
Wow.
So it's a demanding environment. It is.
Well, I would have been fired off my job 100 times already today.
You could be fired for being 5 minutes late.
It's that strict.
Well, you get points.
You get points, but I mean, if that happened
but if you
a few
have too many
times,
points, then you're out.
What do you want? I'm going back to I haven't asked you any of my prepared questions.
Oh,
This has been a fun conversation. I love this.
Thank you, John.
What do you want the film to say about the current state of the American worker in factories or factory jobs? I
mean, the American worker wants to work, has heart, has dedication, but we've got to give them a fighting chance. If you had a decent job where you could afford like a small ranch home and you could once have a car and you could afford to send your kid to college even though you never went to college, that was a path toward the American dream. Right. And that's lost now. And across the Midwest, certainly in Ohio and Dayton, Ohio, we've lost so much of that. And when someone like Bobby or Jill or Timmy, some of the workers you see in the film, they go to that factory hoping they can rebuild that life, that sort of door to the middle class and have stability. But when you're making $12 an hour, when you're at risk for being fired, it's like, is it truly an opportunity? And we want people we hope the film raises this question about like how can people have a decent life in this kind of world?
Yeah.
There's fewer and fewer kind of pathways to the middle class for people especially who maybe have a high school education or some college. Fewer and fewer pathways to the middle class. The middle class is getting smaller. And I think we are not going to continue to have – we're not going to have a middle class if people don't have power at the workplace, if people don't have a collective voice. And I think that, if you can't bargain with your employer on some kind of equal level, you're not ever going to – things are not ever going to get better. Because who's going to speak for the working class?
Right.
And I want to do a little side dive into something that one of the people who works at the company told us. It was an amazing sort of analogy of how culture is built. So Dayton, Ohio, a town we love and a hard-hit town at this moment, given the recent mass shooting, a town we're so proud to be from. Dayton, Ohio is home to a lot of great funk bands, like the Ohio Players and Lakeside, Roger Troutman and Zapp. And we were talking to Ed Warren, who works at the company, and he said he sort of riffed on this analogy. He's like, look, here's how that happened. In the 50s and 60s and 70s, people had blue-collar jobs that made decent money. They were the middle class, but they were blue-collar middle class. Right. But there was enough money they made that it funded the tax base, and it funded schools. Schools had music programs. Kids had to learn instruments. And then these workers owned houses, small, modest houses with garages or basements. Right. And suddenly kids need a place to practice. Kids get together, and suddenly they have a band in the garage. And percolating along the way, you've got these beautiful explosions of culture. And now that's hollowed out. The music programs, art programs are gone, and people can't afford homes. They're doubling up, and so it's a very different kind of landscape.
So we lose the love roller coaster, which is really important, right?
Think of that. Right. If we didn't have that.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you, and it's just walking the line a little bit, and I don't care because we should talk about this. Do you think this is being done systematically on purpose to the American worker? Offering less wages, hours are increasing for them in terms of the amount of taxing on their body, but they're getting paid less. Education is being cut. Art programs are being cut. Is this purposefully turning us into a metropolis society? Do you feel that that's happening?
Well, I do feel that profits are put way over human life here, and it's happening more and more. And I think there's a huge divide between the super wealthy and the people who may work for them. Where there's not. That's one reason we make the kind of films we do. Actually, is that we want people to see. We want workers to see themselves as protagonists in a story, but we also want people who may have never been in a factory or may have never been in a working class home to see what that looks like. I don't know how you feel about that. That would be very scary if that were true, what you're proposing.
If the only metric by which success is measured is profit, then you're going to look for ways to lower labor costs, to increase productivity. All that stuff, the margins are all about profit. We need different metrics. We need a human metric for how does it help a community. We need an environmental metric to say this company is more environmentally thoughtful or smart than that one. Different scales. And if those can go into the mix along with the profit metric, then maybe things can be better. But it's right now we live at the whim and mercy of shareholders, and that's shareholders are so disconnected from the people on the ground.
Well, I think that's what scared me at the end, watching how casually some of these executives in the Chinese in Fuyao were talking about how, we're going to get rid of 4 jobs, get rid of 2 jobs, like it's casual to them. They're just numbers on a ledger. They cease to become human beings. And I've as an empathetic person, I've always been fascinated at people who can do that, because the cost for me personally, I would feel that cost. Having been a manager before and having to had to drop people from full-time status to part-time status and remove their benefits, it destroyed me because I had to be the one that told them. But other people seem to be able to do it with no problem.
Yeah,
I find that interesting.
Automation is coming. And we also hope the film will spark conversations on that. What are we? How are we going to address this thoughtfully and with everyone at the table, including workers, people, or not?
Right. It shouldn't be just the profit motive that drives everything. I mean, that's what I mean about bargaining power. If workers had bargaining power, they could chip into that. They could challenge that. Unions have had that purpose for forever. They've been held back, partly because of these kind of consultants who are help companies avoid unions.
We feel really grateful that this film is having like a national launch on Netflix on August 21, and that we got to work with Participant Media, the folks who did Roma and RBG and Inconvenient Truth, so many great films and documentaries. Participant came on in mid to late 2016 while we were like about halfway through filming. Mm-hmm. And they just became great collaborators with us in terms of thinking about going for nuance, going for a really deeply thoughtful film. Yeah. And then when we were so lucky to get to premiere at Sundance, there was interest in the film from multiple parties, and Netflix and Higher Ground Productions, the new company created by President and Mrs. Obama, they came on board. And with with Netflix, Higher Ground, and Participant, we feel just very grateful that the film is going to get out there in the world in a pretty big way.
Yeah, and I think it's an important film to watch, to experience, to explore for yourself. It will leave you with a number of questions, and it will leave you with a better perception and idea of what might be happening in these states that, for lack of a better term, have been called certain things over the last few years, like flyover states or the forgotten class. And it's important. I've had my own spiritual journey about this over the last few years, of like, well, why aren't we speaking to that American worker more? Why because what are the reasons here? Why aren't we reaching them more? Regardless of political party, what are we doing to help them and bring them back up?
Right. I think the Democrats ignore our part of the country at their peril.
Mm-hmm.
We
certainly saw that in the last election.
We sure did, and we're going to see it again. I mean, I think the fight for the heart of America is going on in the Midwest and will go on in the Midwest more than anywhere else. Mm-hmm. And people who, Democrats, and you can call out both parties really, but unions and working people have given millions and millions of dollars have been given by unions. Yeah. The Democratic candidates, but what have they really gotten for it in terms of improvements in labor laws, enforcement of EPA, enforcement of OSHA? Very little. And that I think is one reason why people kind of gave up on the Democratic Party. Some people did. We know people who voted for President Obama twice, voted for Bill Clinton, and then voted for Trump. Yeah. It's true. They do that because they felt left out.
I heard a profile recently, Fresh Air, something I listen to every morning, and also, I forget the new one that I've been listening to. There's one that the New York Times, they do one where they profiled this entire town.
I read that, yeah.
Right,
that was powerful.
Yeah, and they spoke about the gentleman. He said, I don't blame Trump for what's happening here. There's more involved here, and they want to vilify one thing or the other. That's not what I care about. What I care about, who is going to hire me, who is going to make sure I can put food on my table, make sure I don't have to move to another city and have a long-distance relationship with my wife and my children just to feed them. Mm-hmm. That's what people care about.
We had workers in the factory say, I support a union because I believe a union will fight for me, and I support Trump because I believe Trump will fight for me. Yeah. And, it's fascinating, that kind of very counterintuitive logic.
Mm-hmm. There's a certain – I think the end of our film, leaves people feeling very unsettled. Yeah. It's not a stand-up and cheer kind of movie. Even though it's funny and it's cinematic and there's a lot of really interesting, unusual scenes, you're sort of taken to places you never thought you'd get to go to, right? But it leaves you unsettled. It's like it's like the end of The Graduate. You remember the end of The Graduate?
Of course. I just did a profile on it, right.
Oh, okay.
After they celebrate everything.
After all this happens, all through the film, then there's this moment at the end and you realize, oh, man, nothing has actually been resolved here. Right. And that's what we wanted to do, is kind of, again, present you what we went through, what we saw. That's the best we thought we could do. Not take a side, not make it good guys, bad guys, not make it China versus the U.S., not feed into that, but really just show you this fascinating up-close look at globalization.
And, John, Julia has been making films for 50 years as of this year, and she's been focused on women and working people, these kind of stories, for decades. Right. And this film, Julia's made more films that are sort of overtly partisan or take a side, but with this film, we sort of both feel like all the other work we've done, both solo and together, has led us to try to make this film and to make it as nuanced and complex as it can be.
I think you make an excellent point, Steve. It was something I was going to bring up, but it's perfectly said there. This idea that this is a film from two filmmakers who have taken points of view in their documentaries in the past, but this is more of an open documentary that you, as a filmmaker, as a viewer, will take from it, like you do most great films, narrative or otherwise, fiction or otherwise. You take the lesson that you want to take from the interpretation that you want to get from it, and see how much of it you can apply to your own life and your own thinking.
And hopefully, you've seen a lot of new parts about the world as it is now.
Exactly,
you've learned a lot, but then you can make your own conclusion about it. Yeah, I'm proud of the film for that.
Yeah,
and it is different from other work. Although I must say I learned a lot about like labor history, social history, women's history, what lives are like for working class people, including like for both of us, like our own family background. That all made it possible to make this, I think, really complex film. I think American Factory is actually a challenging. It's fun, but it's a challenging ride.
Yeah, and it's a ride worth taking, that's for sure, and a very accessible film. So it is out now in theaters and on Netflix.
7 U.S. cities, or 7 cities, I'm sorry, not U.S., but like London, Toronto, neither of which are in the U.S., New York, San Francisco, L.A., in Washington, D.C., and Dayton, Ohio.
No, that's right. And this, you can also watch it on Netflix. I can't encourage you enough, if you're listening to The Deep Cut right now and this incredible interview, to give this film your attention. You will walk away changed, or if not, at least with a different point of view and a better understanding of what's happening in our world, business-wise, culturally, and to our American worker. And I love the title, American Factory. It's a thing that exists. It is something we've identified ourselves with as a country for many, many years and decades. And now look how it's changing. And what do you want to see?
And guess what? For the Chinese, it's their American factory.
Right.
It's their American factory because they have Chinese factories, they have German factories, et cetera. But this is their American adventure, you could say.
Right.
And, I hope people will actually get together and have little house parties and watch the film together because it actually provides a great opportunity for discussion.
Certainly. Provided that here today. I hope you both enjoyed the discussion. It was such a pleasure.
John. It was a real pleasure.
Very nice to meet both of you.
Thank you.
Where are you all on social media, or where can they follow you guys, or anything you do? Or sign up for your classes because I hear you teach as well?
We are so pathetic. We do not have a website yet. I'm on Facebook.
Steve's on Facebook.
That's about it. We don't do Twitter. But the film itself has a website. AmericanFactoryFilm.com is a place to go to stay connected to what's going on.
I think it's starting like today.
Yeah,
right?
it's launching
great.
as we speak.
Oh, awesome. Perfect. There you go. Well, that is Julia Reichert and Steve Bognar. Thank you both so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you all for listening to The Deep Cut and taking the time. I always appreciate, as I said, your comments and your words supporting the show. Give it more love. Give it some attention. Give it some stars, what have you, so I can keep bringing on these incredible filmmakers and creative people to talk about their work in the important work and social issues and stuff that's going on in the world that isn't just superhero stuff. There's more going on in the world, and there's so much to explore here. And as I say, and let me end the show like I do all the time, whatever it takes for you to get through the next second, next minute, next hour, next day, next week, next month, next year, do it, because you never know what's waiting for you on the other side. We'll talk to you next time on The Deep Cut.